And I told my kids when they were growing up, they're now 20, 25 and 23. I told them, I said, listen, I don't have a time machine, but if I had one, you would go back in time and you would work on the farm with Granddad. Okay. So I told them, I said, listen to me, you're going to have a much better life than I ever dreamed of having. But if you ever sound like you're entitled, if you ever sound like you're the least bit spoiled, I'm going to take you down to a local horse ranch and you're going to muck out some stalls.
Thank you for joining us on the Evolve Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Olia Merkes. Just want to give a huge shout out to Icon Industries. We can't do this show without all the incredible people that are here. Shane, Steven, Shane, everybody here. Thank you so much. We appreciate all that you do. And without further ado, a very, very influential person in San Diego, Mike Litton, from the Mike Litton Experience, real estate investor, real estate broker, loan officer. How many titles do you have?
I wear a few hats.
A few?
I'm getting neck strain from all the hats.
Are you?
Yeah, I actually, I've got my background. I started in finance. So I actually got into the business because I got turned down for a home loan. And it was actually right down the street here from the studio. I wanted to buy a house. It was actually a foreclosure. It was a property that was having some, it was distressed. It was in rough shape, that kind of thing. And I was going to buy it. Owner occupy it, fix it up, turn around, resell it in a couple of years and start that way. And I was referred to a bank that shall remain nameless down the street here. And I walked in and I applied. And 3 weeks later, I got a form letter in the mail that said that I'd been declined. And I called them. I went to the bank, to the location, to the branch. The loan officer would go in the back and hide. I'm a big guy. I'm kind of loud and I look a little intimidating, I guess, to some people. And I'm not that mean unless you come after somebody that I love.
Right.
Right. So he would go and hide in the back. So I went to the branch manager. I said, I need somebody to help me turn a no into a yes. And she said, I've never done a loan in my life. I can't help you. So I went to my dad, who is like my sage, right? When life doesn't make sense, I go talk to him. So I'm having a beer with him in his garage, and I explained to him what happened, and he goes, I don't know why we're having this conversation. I said, well, excuse me? He goes, you've never taken no for an answer in your life. Because you remember when you were in Little League and you didn't make that H&N Sports team in Ponca City, Oklahoma? Do you remember you made me take you down there and you confronted the owner? You were all of 8 years old. You confronted the owner about why you didn't make his team at tryouts. And he told you specifically what you needed to do. You made me make a contraption based on his suggestion of a hitting thing with a rope and a ball, a baseball and a swing set, right? And he made me one, and I hit balls every day for the next year. Every day for the next year, regardless of whether it was snowing, it was raining, and it snows and it rains in Oklahoma. I absolutely took more fielding practice, and I was an all-star the next year. Not only did I make the team, I was the captain of the team, and I was an all-star. So Dad's like, I don't know why we're having this conversation. You've never taken no for an answer in your life. So I took that to mean I needed to go get my real estate license and get into the mortgage business because I knew I could do a lot better than that guy did. Right. So I got into the business. My first month in the business, I got a loan approved that 8 other lenders had turned down.
Got it.
And if we hadn't had it approved, those people would have lost their house to foreclosure, their dream house that they were building. They would have lost it to foreclosure in 2 weeks. And it was like, I called them to let them know they were approved, and they cried. They couldn't even talk. Both of them were crying on the phone. You can't put a number on there. It's not about the money. It's about making things happen and helping people. And I was off and running, and I became one of the top mortgage originators in the nation. And I loved every minute of it. So yeah, that's how I got started in the business.
It's because you do it for the right reasons, which is the people aspect of things.
Yeah. Well, I became known in San Diego as the guy that could get things approved, right? And when other people would turn them down, or other people would look the other way, or wouldn't spend an extra 15 minutes, if that loan officer had spent an extra 15 minutes confirming what I told him, okay, just giving me the benefit of the doubt and confirming what I told him, I would have been approved. I had perfect credit.
Right.
Perfect credit. All he needed to do was spend 15 minutes and he didn't do it. And, now I thank him, right?
Not much has changed since then.
Yeah. So years ago, I ran into him several years later.
Get out.
At UTC Mall, and we were shopping. We were Christmas shopping, and it was last minute. It was literally Christmas Eve, right? And I was way behind on my Christmas shopping. I was trying to get it all finished, and I run into him, and I'm like, "Hey, how you doing?" He goes, "Oh man, I'm having my best year ever. I'm going to fund a little over $3 million this year. It's my best year ever. I'm knocking it out of the park." And I'm like, "Great, congratulations, Merry Christmas!" Right? And I left. What I didn't say to him was I was actually doing 27 million that year, and I was doing 4.5 million that month. So in that month, I was actually funding more than he was doing his entire year, but I didn't say anything because I figured if my dad had been standing there, he would have been proud of me. So I didn't say anything, right?
Yeah.
Bit my tongue, didn't rub it in, moved on. Later, I told my dad the story, and he's like, "I would have been, yeah, I'm proud of you because you didn't say anything."
What's the point?
What's the point?
Doesn't accomplish anything.
But here's the thing.
How does Mike's journey go from Oklahoma to San Diego? How did that all shape out?
Well, that was interesting. So I'm born in Oklahoma, and I start farming with my grandfather at 9 years old. I couldn't even reach the pedals on the trucks or the tractor or any of that kind of stuff. And I was so small that the neighbor lady looked out, called my grandfather after she drove by the home place. And she said, "Whoever you had running that tractor has fallen off the tractor." Because I was so small, she couldn't see me. She was older, right? So she couldn't see me. And he panicked, right? So I farmed with him for 9 years. So I'm in the midst of farming. I'm 13 years old. I've been farming with him now for 4 years. And my parents come to me and say, "Hey, we've been transferred to San Diego. We're leaving. We're moving." "Oh, no, I'm not. I'm not going anywhere. I'm farming. I'm here," right? They were a little shocked. And we ended up entering into negotiations, basically, and we compromised that I would come here with them and I would go to school here because I was 13, right? I'm not emancipated or anything, right? So I would come here, I would go to school here, and then every summer day I would spend in Oklahoma working. Because in Oklahoma, that's where you do all your work. You get all the ground ready, you get ready for planting, all that. Planting actually happens in October, but you get everything ready. All the real work happens during the summer. And so the agreement was the day that summer hit, I was on a plane to Oklahoma. And there were a few years during that span that I actually went early. So I've been out here now for 44 years, coming up President's Day holiday. So
what did you love about farming? How come you were so passionate?
I love the fact that, and I just interviewed somebody the other day on our podcast that literally grew up farming. And we were talking about what they loved about, in fact, it was Bob Norris, the guy I was telling you about. He was 12 years old, and his dad owned a dairy farm. And he, before you can drive legally, if you're on a farm, you can drive. If you're on a farm, you can run equipment like adults do, right? And a lot of farmers need that because they need that added help. They can't necessarily afford ranch hands and all that kind of thing. And so, it's the idea that I was living and doing what my grandfather had done. And I grew up in my grandfather's shadow. He was larger than life, absolutely larger than life. And he was somebody that when I grew up, I wanted to be just like him. And what's amazing is if you look at pictures of him I'm 57. If you look at pictures of him when he's 57 years old, we look like the same person.
Really?
We cut our hair the same. We look like the same exact person. We both have the same dimples. I mean, we look like the same person. And according to my family, I act exactly like him, good and bad. So, I grew up learning. I use things every day. To this day, I still use things every day that I learned from him.
What's the most valuable lesson you've learned from him?
Work ethic, quality. So the very first alfalfa field that I ever baled for another. So as a hire, right? So there's a farmer for hire thing where, and the thing about alfalfa hay, and a lot of people don't know this, is alfalfa hay itself has very small little hooks in the leaves, and it gets into your skin, kind of like fiberglass, and irritates you. Okay, And when it's hot and humid and you're sweaty and all that kind of stuff, it's a really uncomfortable thing to do. And so most farmers, when they get to a point where they can hire somebody, they'll hire somebody like me gleefully to go do it for them, right? So I do this 80-acre field, and the very first turn that I made, and this is my first time baling alfalfa hay for somebody else other than my grandfather, the very first turn I made, I missed a swath of hay that was like a crescent, like a shape of a crescent moon, right? So I made a turn and I missed it. It was, 0 here and 0 here. Probably the widest spot was about that much. I mean, it wasn't 1/32 of a bale of hay. Okay. But the fact that I missed it was completely unacceptable. And I was done. I was tired. I was ready to go home. I was hungry. I put the baler in road, what we call road mode, where you put it back behind the tractor. I had put it in there, and he comes flying across the field. I'll never forget this. Comes flying across the field, slams on his brakes, honks his horn, opens up his door, jumps out of his truck before it even stops. Okay. And says, "Put that thing back in regular mode and get your tail back up there. You missed a piece of hay." So I put it back in regular mode, baling mode, went back up, got that swath picked up, never missed another swath ever. I never missed another piece of hay ever. But I knew that it was the standard. Now, was it humiliating? Yes. Was I mad? Yes. Was I embarrassed? Absolutely. But I never missed another piece of hay. And I learned that that's our standard. Okay. And I never wavered from that.
Mike, isn't it crazy, like how it sticks with you at such a young age that you establish standards?
Oh, I did never.
Crazy?
I'll tell you, I would never trade the way I grew up.
Right.
Never, not in a million years. And I told my kids when they were growing up, they're now 20, 25 and 23. I told them, I said, "Listen, I don't have a time machine, but if I had one, you would go back in time and you would work on the farm with Granddad." Okay. So I told him, I said, "Listen to me, you're going to have a much better life than I ever dreamed of having." Okay. But if you ever sound like you're entitled, if you ever sound like you're the least bit spoiled, if you ever sound like at all that you are anything like that, I'm going to take you down to a local horse farm, horse ranch, and you're going to muck out some stalls. And they'd look at me. They're the first time they looked at, "What's mucking?" Like, "You're going to shovel some horse shit. That's it. That's it. That's what you're going to do. And you're going to do it for free. And you're going to do it until you don't feel entitled anymore."
I had no idea, but I'm wearing Yellowstone socks. I don't know if you watched the show, but
actually, I'm a huge Yellowstone fan.
Are you?
My daughter just gave me for Christmas, she gave me a Yellowstone mug.
Okay.
And it's my favorite, Dutton Ranch, the whole thing.
It's a friendship made to happen.
Yeah, I'm a huge,
and you just saw it live.
Guy.
We just bonded over Yellowstone.
Absolutely.
When you brought up Norris and you said he's like uber famous in Montana, I'm like, oh, I got to watch that episode. Yeah. I'm Montana fantasies. I'm moving there.
42 years in Shelby, Montana. On radio.
You talk about growing up hard and teaching those lessons to your kids, making sure that they're not entitled by any means. And I talk about this a lot on the podcast, which is I think the solution to a lot of our issues in the community is parenting. It's like fundamentally, how are we raising and, teaching our kids how to become adults, productive members of the community? What are your thoughts?
Do you mind if I tell you a story?
Yeah.
So I sold a house last year for a client of mine they've been clients of mine for 15 years. And I had sold a condo for them 15 years ago that they couldn't sell. The wife's best friend was a realtor, and she had been trying to sell this thing for months and couldn't sell it. And they were going to lose it. They were going to go bankrupt. And I met her, and she said, "I need you to help us." And we got it done. We sold it in 8 days for $18,000 above list price when it had been on the market all those months. And so this time they call me 12 years later, the husband calls me and he says, "Hey, we're leaving California. We need you to sell this house for us." Right. So I sell it for $100,000 plus above asking price, $110,000 above asking price. And I present the offer to him. He signs it right away. I present it to her. She goes, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I want to leave California. I don't know if I want to sell. I may want to stay another year." I said, "Well, what if we find you a rental?" right? So I call my network, and a buddy of mine sends me a photo of a for rent sign that's in the front yard of a place in Carlsbad in the same master plan community that I'd sold that condo for them in, right? So I knew the master plan community was a hit or a yes. And so I call on the for rent sign and I leave a voicemail message. The guy calls me back 3 hours later, and we spend over an hour on the phone. And almost the entire hour, he's asking me parenting advice. He's got an 11-year-old, 13-year-old, and 15-year-old at home. And he asked me, he goes, "Do you have kids?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "How old are they?" So they're 23 and 25. I goes, "Perfect." He goes, "Mind if I ask you?" And he starts asking me all these questions. And he said at one point, he said, "So when your children told you that they were not going to go on a family vacation with you, what did you say?" I said, "Well, here's the secret. My children would never say that to me."
Okay.
Right? But if they had, here's what I would have done. And so I went through the whole thing with him, laid it out for him. And so I told a buddy of mine who actually started the charter school system in Escondido, American Heritage Charter School System. I told him about it when I interviewed him for our podcast. And he said, "You know something?" He said, "You should be a parent coach. You should coach parents." And he said, I've got 60 parents that I could refer to you right now." Parenting is such a huge thing that nobody talks about. Nobody talks about what you can do as a parent versus what people are not even willing to do. Okay. So before we got married, my wife and I would go to a restaurant, and there were kids in the cubicle or in the booth next to us losing their minds, throwing food, screaming, doing all kinds of things right. And I just told her, I said, "Listen, when our kids come, they're not going to act like this. Period." And so when our children came, what we did was we basically told them, we said, "Listen, going out to eat, going out to the movies, going out anywhere outside of this house is a privilege, not a right. And so you're going to act the way that daddy requires you to act, or you're not going out. Do you understand?" And they absolutely understood. And when we would go to a restaurant and these kids in these other booths were losing their minds, my children would just look at them and then look at me like, "You would never, ever allow us to act like that." The thing is, schools are not here to parent your kids. The government's not here to parent your kids. You are here to parent your kids. Now, kids are going to push back. Kids are going to resist. Kids are going to I told my kids, I said, "Listen, when you become a teenager, you're going to bring it. When you become a teenager, you're going to challenge daddy's values. Here's the deal. You need to be prepared to lose. Okay? Because you're going to lose. You bring it. You bring everything you got, but you're going to lose. Because one thing daddy will not compromise on is our values. Period. Okay? So they knew going into their teenage years that they were really defeated before they got started. The long and the short of it is, parents can be a parent. You can't be their best friend and be their parent. Okay? You can be their best friend after. Once you've raised them, my kids are my best friends now because they respect. And by the way, both of them have come to me, and my wife has come to me. You've never met my wife, but she doesn't compliment anybody. The other day, she told me the reason our kids turned out the way they did was because I parented them the way that I did. Okay? Both of my kids have come to me and said, "Dad, we're so appreciative you raised us the way you did."
Your grandfather's legacy continues.
Absolutely. Because I raised them the way my grandfather would have.
Yeah.
If my grandfather had been here, he would have raised them the exact. And I told him this. I said, "Listen, I'm going to raise you the way my grandfather would have raised you. The standard that he gave me is the standard you're going to get. And you're going to live by that standard, period. I'm going to be that big, giant, immovable object in the room that it's either right or it's wrong. It's black or it's white. That's it. No, there's no gray area here. Okay? That's the way you're going to be raised." And when they would come to me with, "Well, so-and-so's parent lets them do this," well, I'm not raising them.
Right.
I'm raising you. Okay? And I'm not here to be your best friend. You don't like what I'm telling you. You don't like the decisions that I'm making. You're not supposed to like what I'm doing. But what I am doing is I'm preparing you to go out in that big, beautiful world and to be a leader. I'm not preparing you to go out in that world and be a burden. Okay? You're going to go out into that world and you're going to make that world, our world, a better place than you left it. Period. Okay? Now, did they not like me growing up? No, they didn't. And they willingly admit it. But the fact of the matter is, I wasn't there to be the most popular guy in the world. I wasn't there to be their best friend. I wasn't there for them to be my biggest fan. I was there to prepare them. Period. And I believe that if parents make that their mission and they take their mission seriously, our children will turn out to be leaders. And they'll be leaders that we will be proud of, and they will leave this world a better place than the way they found it.
You bring up leadership, and it's so interesting to me how distracted we are. Okay? We're always distracted with our phones and all that stuff. I'm guilty of it. We all are. And it's like, if you don't have the quiet time to think about how to make this place, how to make your communities better, how to make your neighborhood better, like nothing changes.
Yeah.
And I think that's that, when you talk about leadership starts when you're young.
Yeah.
It's the standards that your parents set to say, hey, this is how we behave. This is how you treat other people. This is communicate. Like, it's so funny. We'll go out with my sons and they'll say hi, but then there's no conversation. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, how are you ever going to connect with people? So like one of my favorite things that I've done now in regards to a parent is you don't become hard by doing easy things. Mm-hmm. You become hard by doing hard things. Mm-hmm. And so that's all I talk to the boys about. I'm like, you got to do hard things, and you can't force them, because there reaches a point where you got to think for yourself. Mm-hmm. And say, this is what I value. Mm-hmm. This is the life I want to live. Life is more about others and serving others and making an impact. So it's crazy how you bring up all these things, and the parenting, when they come to you, when your kids come to you now that they're adults and they say to you, hey, Dad, thank you so much for having that standard. How does that make you feel?
Blessed. Absolutely blessed. And, it also fuels me. It makes me want, like that gentleman that I spent over an hour on the phone with, right? I'm advising him on how to parent his kids. I called about a house that he had for rent,
right,
for a client of mine. That took all of 5 minutes of the conversation. The entire rest of the time, over an hour, we spent talking about parenting. And the whole time that we were doing it, he's like, oh, that's brilliant. You used the Socratic method to raise your kids. Yeah, I did. See, I don't believe that you need to talk to your kids. I believe you need to ask your kids questions. And I'll tell you why. When we're born, literally from the time we come out of the womb, we are programmed to answer questions. If you don't think so, grab a newborn and ask them a question. They'll be, looking around, right? Ask them a question. They'll look right at you. Find a toddler that's throwing a fit and tears running down their face and upset and all this kind of stuff. Walk up to them and go, what's wrong? What happened? They'll stop what they're doing. They'll forget what it was that they were upset about, and they'll look at you. They want to answer your question. One of the things about the terrible twos is the terrible twos are because they're frustrated because they can't communicate. They're not able to communicate with you what they're feeling. They don't understand how to communicate feelings, right? So a buddy of mine years ago, we were sitting at a breakfast meeting, and he was wanted to buy this piece of land. It was a development. He wanted to build 8 houses, and I was trying to talk him out of it, believe it or not. And I was going to be representing him on it. So I'm sitting with him like, this thing's got a lot of hair on it. This is one of those deals that you may want to think about passing on, right? And he just checks out mentally. Like we're sitting there talking, and he just leaves me. You could tell. And I'm like, okay, what's up? What's going on? And he goes, we have our firstborn, our 1-year-old, our son. I said, yeah. He goes, we're seriously considering having him evaluated on the autism spectrum. What? Why? He goes, he hasn't said anything for 2 months. I'm like, no, that's not the same kid. I would call you and he'd be in the truck with you. I would talk to him over the speakerphone. Like I would talk to his dad over the speakerphone, and he'd be in the back in the car seat going blah, 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 talking all this baby talk because he wanted to be in the conversation. So I would have conversations with him. Now I didn't understand a thing that he was saying, but I would ask him questions over the speakerphone, right? Like, that's not the same kid. He goes, yeah, for the last 2 months, he hasn't said a thing. So let me ask you a question. What does he do when he wants something? He goes, he points and he grunts. Okay, I did the exact same thing when I was a kid. The difference was the gal that was watching me was a neighbor lady, a farmer's wife that had 6 boys. She didn't have time for pointing and grunting. Okay, so if you wanted something, pointing and grunting wasn't going to get it. You had to tell her what it was you wanted by necessity, right? Sort of like that immersion thing. If you want to learn Spanish, you throw your kid in Mexico, right? That kind of deal, right? So I told him, I said, so when you go home to him, what do you do? He goes, well, he comes up and he comes up to me and I give him a hug and a kiss and tell him I love him. And I said, okay. And I go, what else? He goes, well, I talk to him. I said, okay, stop doing that. He goes, which part? I said, well, pick him up and hug him and kiss him and tell him you love him, but stop talking to him. He goes, okay. I said, just start asking him questions. Don't say anything to him directly. Just ask him questions. He can't answer, but ask him. Did you go see the birds today? Did you get to go outside? How did you do with mama? Did you take good care of mama? All these, just ask questions. Okay. Ask. Okay. And I said, when he points and grunts, tell him that make him tell you what it is. Make him tell you what it is that he wants. Now he's going to cry because he has you trained and mama. Your firstborn, your firstborn, they even act like they're going to whimper. You jump and leap like Superman, like you can tail a building in a single, whatever it was, right? Bound. You will leap over things to try to get superhuman wise, right? To try to get them whatever it is they want so they won't cry. Get mama on board. Make sure she agrees to this, but do that. But 3 or 4 days later, I call him. I said, how are we doing? He goes, well, we're not going to have him evaluated. I said, why is that? And he goes, we can't get him to shut up.
Oh,
that kid was dying to talk to them.
Right.
They just had to pull it out of him. Human beings are the exact same way. When they're sitting and they're looking in their iPad, when they're sitting and they're looking in their phone, when they're sitting and they're focusing on something else, they're dying to tell you their story. They're dying to tell you what's going on with them. You just have to ask them a couple of questions.
Talk about a great lead in.
Get it out of them. Just pull it out of them. The power of questions is so unbelievably amazing. And so when he said to me, when that gentleman said, who, by the way, turned out to be a chief of staff at a major hospital.
Oh,
right. And he's like, Mike, this is brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant. I said, listen, if your kids come to you and say that they won't go on a vacation with you, then I want you to sit down with them and I want you to ask them. So let me ask you a question. Why would you not want to go on vacation with us? What is it that's holding you back? Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what it is that's making you feel like you want to stay here when the rest of us go to wherever it is we're going. It doesn't matter where it is, right? But wherever it is that you're going, why is it, right? And what will happen is they will sit with you and they will know that you care. I'm going to give you, if it's okay, I'm going to give you a real quick example. So I taught for Southwestern College years ago. A friend of mine ran the business and real estate department down there. And her very first class she taught was real estate principles. And very first class, she never taught before. And she gave them an assignment. And the assignment was that they were to go out and they were to talk to a local real estate broker, interview with them, and come back, write a paper, come back and present it to the class. Half of them quit. Half of them quit.
Okay.
And she said, she called them and she's like, what happened? And they're like, these people were jerks to us. They were not nice to us. If we have to work for them, we don't want to be in real estate. Okay. She goes, well, I'll tell you what, I know an owner broker. I own the Keller Williams office here in Escondido for 18 years. She goes, I know an owner broker that's not that way. Come back for one class. That's all I ask. Come back for the next class. I'll have him come down and talk to us. If you want to quit after that, you can quit. Okay. All of them stayed except for one. And the one that didn't stay had a health situation with their family. She told me after that, she said, you will be talking to every single class I have from now on. So she has this real estate practice class 3 or 4 years later at the National City Education Center. And I walk in and there's 45 people there. And I get up and I start talking, and I've been talking maybe 10, 15 minutes. There's a kid in the back left-hand corner that has his hat on sideways and he's got his arms folded. And every time I say something, he's rah, rah, to his neighbor, right? And I'm real patient, so I got all that I could stand. I walked back there, folded my arms and stood over him, and I said, I get the feeling that you don't think I know what I'm talking about. He said, I think you're full of SHIT.
Okay.
And I said, great. Would you mind if I give you an example here right now, live? Oh, I'd love to see this, right? So I walked up front and I picked out the hottest girl in the room. All the guys had been checking her out. I walked up, I stuck my hand out. I said, hi, I'm Mike. She said, hi, I'm Missy. I said, have we ever met before? She said, no. I said, can I ask you a question? She said, sure. I said, where were you born? She said, Chula Vista. I said, great. Did you grow up in Chula Vista? She said, yeah. So what was your favorite thing about growing up in Chula Vista? She said, the beach. I said, awesome. What was your favorite thing about the beach? She goes, the ocean. Oh, cool. What was your favorite thing about the ocean? She said, swimming in the ocean. And I said, what was your favorite thing about swimming in the ocean? She goes, Mike, I never feel as free as I do when I'm swimming in the ocean. And Ollie, she got euphoric. She had this, what we call a state change, like she was swimming in the ocean. She was feeling it. Okay. So I asked her, I said, can I ask you a question? She said, sure. I said, we've known each other now less than a minute. Do you feel closer to me? We never met before. Do you feel closer to me than you did a minute ago? She said, closer. I'm ready to marry you.
Oh, shit. Miriam would have a problem with that.
Well, we were Miriam and I were married at the time.
I know. Right? That's what I'm saying.
She's like, I'm ready to marry you, right? And the place went nuts. We never heard another thing out of that kid in the corner.
Right.
Okay. At the end of the class, she came up to me and she said, you know, Mr. Litton, I'm 18 years old. And she said, I've stopped dating. She said, you're the only man that has shown any interest in me other than my father. She said, the boys my age are all about themselves. They're all about whatever app they're on. They're all about whatever phone they're using. They're all about whatever car they're driving. They're all about whatever they're doing. They don't care anything about me. She's like, if a man shows the kind of interest in me that you showed in me, it really does get my attention. It really is one of the, right? She goes, I was sort of joking, but I was sort of not. And I told her, I said, Missy, I'm married.
Right.
You know, yeah. Right. Happily. You know,
Happily.
Right. Yeah. So, but it was, questions are powerful. Now, all I did in that example was what we call piggyback questions, right? Where were you born? Chula Vista. Great. Did you grow up in Chula Vista? Yeah. What was your favorite thing about growing up in Chula Vista? The beach. Great. What was your favorite thing about the beach? The ocean. What was your favorite thing about the ocean? Swimming in the ocean. What was your favorite thing about swimming in the ocean? Right? All I did was take her answer and ask her about her answer. It's called active listening. What's happened today is that our idea of communication today is I'm talking and you're sitting there trying to figure out what you're going to say next, instead of listening to what it is that I'm saying. That's a debate. That's not a conversation. Okay. Conversation needs to be one person talking to another person and that person's listening to what they're saying. And then if you want to be an active listener, you ask them about what it is that they just said. Okay. So let's say your kid comes, it's a parenting thing, right? Let's say your kids come home and they had a bad day and they come home and they take their book bag and they throw their book bag on the floor. Okay. What happened today? Okay. So this person was ugly to you, right? Yeah. Okay. How did that make you feel? Okay. So tell me about that feeling. Tell me why you felt that way when that person, and then how do we solve it? Is there a way for us to figure out a way to make this right? Okay. There's all kinds of, the sky is the limit in terms of what you can do with your kids if you just learn how to pull out of them whatever it is that's going on inside them. Now, if they're more of an introvert, it's going to be even more of a challenge. But you cannot find out unless you ask. There's no way to, they don't show, and you know this, teenagers won't just show up and say, this is what's happening. This is what's going on with me. This is what I'm feeling.
Kids aren't easy?
No, they just don't do it. They just don't do it. Right? So you have to be in a place where, and by the way, if they know you're going to ask anyway, they're already prepared that when they come home and they throw their book bag on the floor or they slam a door or they do whatever it is that they do, they know you're going to ask. They're already prepared. The skids are already greased, right? They're ready that they know they're going to have to talk to dad. Okay? So when they, if you on a regular basis practice this, you can prepare them. You can literally soften the clay so that when they come home, they're ready to talk. And it encourages communication because they know that you care enough to ask.
It also allows you the opportunity to get to know your kids better.
Yeah.
A lot better.
Absolutely.
You know, it's incredible how much I've learned about my sons recently just by asking more questions.
Yeah. And you can find out who's having an influence on them too.
Absolutely.
Because they'll tell you.
Yeah.
They'll tell you so-and-so said this and that made me do this, or so-and-so did this, and I think that sounds cool. You now know you have a roadmap for what it is that potentially could be leading them down the wrong way.
Yeah, and Mike, we were gonna, I'm gonna change it up for a little bit for us.
Sure.
We were gonna talk about real estate and affordability. I actually think, hold on though, I actually think that's a longer topic.
Yeah.
So we're gonna
on
have you come back and talk about that because I love what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're educating on affordability issues and making a campaign. So we're gonna dedicate just one episode to that because that's a huge conversation.
It is.
That's not a let's wrap it up in 20 minutes because I want to give all the hardworking people in California that are busting their ass to be able to get into home ownership. And unfortunately, that's not going to happen.
You mind if I throw a little tease
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So one of the things that we found through our research is that millennials have a negative impression of homeownership. And it's because when they were children, it was 2008, it was the Great Recession. Everybody was a lot of people were losing their houses to foreclosure, and they were watching the people around them that they cared about, their teachers, their family members, right? They were watching them lose their houses. So millennials have grown up with this PTSD where real estate ownership is concerned. Okay. So the reason why we're writing the book is we're literally taking the case. The reason we're doing the podcast, all the things we're doing it because we want a larger megaphone, and we want an opportunity to take the case directly to millennials that the American dream, part of that needs to be homeownership again. The average tenant in the U.S., according to the National Association of Realtors, last year was worth just under $8,000 net worth. The average homeowner was worth over $300,000.
Okay. Perfect example of like that. That's how important insight and knowledge and going out there. Like before I got into real estate, I was just blown away at how uneducated I was until I started living. And it's really unrealistic to expect someone to have that knowledge base unless they do it for a living. So that's why I'm a huge fan of that. And I want to dedicate an episode. You didn't know that. I want to give it the respect that it deserves because it's like a huge epidemic, in my opinion, about like, how come like we're losing residents like in droves? People are leaving. But there's still people coming too, which is driving up our home prices, which is, it's a crazy cycle.
Yeah, it really is.
You talked about questions, asking questions. You have your podcast, the Mike Litton Experience. How to talk about your experience of starting the podcast. How has it made you better? What impact have you been able to make?
Well, we got to go back a little bit.
Let's go.
In 2011, during the sort of the wave of, or ripples, if you will, of the 2008 Great Recession, in 2011, a lot of people were losing their homes to foreclosure. And I was an REO broker. So the bank would hire me to go out when they foreclosed on a house. My job was to go out to that house and secure it. And if the former owner was still in the house, I had to tell the former owner that they didn't own it anymore.
Right.
And most of them were completely clueless. They had no idea that they wouldn't have otherwise known, right? And so I'd go out there and I'd say, you don't own the house anymore. Like, no, yesterday I sent $9,000 to this firm that told me that I would never lose my house to foreclosure. It can't be, right? Well, because of all that, and because I was spending all this time educating people on how the system actually works, which by the way is also the inspiration for the book, I got frustrated. And when I get frustrated, it gets a little scary, right? So I went out and I went to 760 KFMB and I met with the station manager and I said, I'm frustrated and I want to get the truth out to the American people. And a very wise man once said, if you want to change the world, start in your own little corner of it. And the station manager said, can you start tomorrow? I said, no, not exactly. It was on a Friday. And the next day was Saturday. And I was going to pick this time slot that was 3 to 4 on Saturday afternoons. It was the least listened to hour they had their entire weekend lineup. Within 2 months, according to Arbitron, we turned it into #1 in all of AM radio in their time slot. And it was because we told people the truth. We saved thousands of homes from foreclosure. It was a very cool thing. So go back to that. So 2011, I start on radio. Almost immediately, they bring me on Channel 8 to talk about real estate and talk about homeownership and talk about what's happening with foreclosures and all that kind of thing in the market. And so I've been on radio and television since 2011. But one of the things that I loved the most about having my radio shows was I would interview people and get to know them. Cold off the street, right? So a sponsor would bring somebody in I'd never met before, and we would sit and we'd have a conversation. I'd learn how they ended up in San Diego, how they ended up meeting their spouse, how they ended up in real estate, or how they ended up in whatever it was they were doing. And I loved that. The thing was, there's a net 36 minutes in every hour of commercial radio because of news breaks, because of commercial breaks, all this stuff. And so we used to have multiple guests, so we weren't able to get in depth. So I told myself if I ever had a podcast or when I had a podcast, I was going to go in depth. I was going to get people's life stories because everybody wants to connect. Everybody wants to connect with another person. They all do. And what happens is when we do these life stories, when we do our episodes, people tell their life story and people find things about them that they connect with. Okay. So the very first interview we ever did was with Alan Nevin. Alan Nevin was a regular on my radio show since 2011, one of the top economists in the nation. He's the chief economist for the San Diego Association of Realtors. Dude's just an epic brain. I mean, he's a guru, right, in real estate. So we interview him. Turns out that he has the same educational pedigree of a guy you might have heard of from Google. He's Larry Page's partner. So he and Larry Page, he went to University of Maryland, graduated with his bachelor's degree, and got an MBA from Stanford, just like Alan did, right? And Google was their graduation project. He and Larry Page. Google was their graduation project for their MBA at Stanford. That's how Google came about.
And you had him on the podcast?
Well, I had not him, but I had Alan Nevin on the podcast, right? So he and Alan Nevin are connected, right? Do you see what I'm talking about?
I do.
People find ways to connect with other people based on their life story. And it's kind of cool. So one of the things what we do is we sit down with people and we literally have them tell us about where they were born, and they go all the way up to today. So this morning, for instance, we had John Sapienti on, and John runs a company. He has a company that he took over of his dad's company, another company that he bought that was distressed in 2010 that he runs. So he's got these two corporations that he runs, but then he has this other corporation called VolitionAmerica.com.
Okay.
VolitionAmerica.com is a branding company that brands with Folds of Honor. Folds of Honor is a charity that provides educational assistance to our fallen heroes, to our fallen active duty, fallen first responders, that kind of thing. They go and help educate their kids through this foundation. And so they have a partner a merchandising licensing agreement with like Puma, Cobra. They do, make golf equipment, golf apparel, that kind of thing. That's branded with Folds of Honor, that kind of deal, right? What an amazing guy. Okay. And, we got his life story this morning on tape on our podcast. And I mean, it's hard to imagine. I interviewed a kid, 24 years old, who was an active gang member. Everybody in his family were active gang members. He went to school his freshman year in high school, his second semester, 2 weeks before his second semester was up. There was a gang member that came on from a rival gang that came on campus and threatened him with a knife and said, "I've been trying to find your cousin to kill him, and I can't find your cousin, so I'm going to kill you instead." And he ends up wrestling the knife away from the kid, and they end up expelling him because of the zero tolerance policy. So he flunks out of his second semester of his freshman year in high school. If you think about this in terms of statistics, that kid should either be dead or in prison. Okay. He went home and told his mother, "There's a charter school down the street, charter high school. I want to attend that charter high school." He went there, graduated a year early with a 4.0 GPA, went to San Diego City College, graduated with a after 2 years, with his associate's degree, 2 years, 4.0 GPA, qualifies for the chancellor's scholarship at UCSD, graduates at UCSD, 4.0 GPA, or actually 4.0 plus GPA, number 4 in a class of 600, or number 6 in a class of 400, pardon me, and literally has 3 letters of recommendation for admission to Harvard Law. He's one step away from attending Harvard Law School. Those are the kinds of stories that we have on our podcast.
I mean, what an incredible, because we were talking earlier and I'm like, you have to earn to be on a podcast.
Yeah.
Like when you're coming into a studio and stuff, like what an incredible kid. What was his name?
Well, his name's Rudy Rivera.
Rudy.
And he's actually,
go Rudy.
Yeah. So Rudy is the man.
He is the man.
Right. So I interviewed him because he was my escrow officer. And I was so impressed. I was so impressed with what he did as an escrow officer. I wanted to get his life story. I had no idea. Ollie, I had no clue.
Okay. Mike,
no clue.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It's absolutely insane. It's like these people we interact with, everybody goes through like crazy journeys. I think what's been mind-blowing, and you can speak to this directly, like how much do you learn being in this seat?
Yeah. It's amazing.
And listening to people's stories, you're like, holy shit.
Yeah. It's amazing. And just when you think, now here's the other thing. So this has been a real journey for me, right? And one of the things that I've learned is there's so much more going on behind the scenes than you ever could possibly imagine with somebody, right? Because people, and that's we talked about questions earlier, right? The power of questions is you can pierce through that veil. You can pierce through that with the right questions. You can get through that politically correct thing. Like, how are you doing today? I'm fine. Okay, well, that's politically correct. I'm telling you what I think you want to hear, right? Okay, start asking them questions about what that means. Start asking them questions about what's happened today. Start asking them questions specifically about them. And all of a sudden you start getting deeper. You start getting deeper. And eventually you get to a place to where you find pain. And then what you do is you figure out that pain has turned into something that they've constructively used to go back and triumph. Okay. This whole thing is amazing how life goes full circle. And you never, ever, ever know. So I interviewed a lady yesterday, Dr. Nina, who has a PhD in nursing. Now, she grew up in the poorest neighborhood of Cleveland, Ohio. Parents on food stamps, welfare, all this kind of stuff. I mean, you would not have believed all the things that she dealt with growing up. The poverty, the just unbelievable things she dealt with. And every challenge you could think of, right? And she was able to go to school, get a scholarship, become a registered nurse. She's now invented, and a PhD in nursing, right? She now has a degree in engineering. She has invented a hand sanitizing machine that sits attached to the railing of a hospital bed, and it talks to the patient and says to the patient, "Have you cleaned your hands? Have you cleaned your hands? Have you cleaned your hands?" All they have to do is wave their hand underneath. They get hand sanitizer and they can sanitize their hands right there. They don't have to get out of bed. None of that. So when a meal is brought to them, it automatically asks them, have you cleaned your hands? How freaking cool is that? She's in 2 hospitals right now. She's going worldwide. She's going worldwide. And I had an opportunity to hear her life story. This woman is such a light. I mean, it's absolutely amazing what people can do if they keep their eye on the ball of, I'm going to make a contribution and I'm going to leave this world a better place than how I found it. And that's what I'm discovering, is I'm discovering how this journey of life for them has brought them to where they are today. And it's just astounding. Absolutely fascinating.
Well, Mike, you spend so much time talking about impact, and that's, I want to give a shout out to Ryan Lipsey.
Yeah.
Ryan was a guest on our show, and I think you've had him on your show?
Twice.
Okay.
You ready for this?
He connected.
You ready for this?
Absolutely. He connected us. And I just want to give him a huge thank you, because the moment we spoke, I'm like, Mike has a purpose. He's got a mission for what he wants to get done. And now he has a platform to be able to do it.
Yeah.
That's why I was excited about getting you on, because I think there's more of these stories that we need to share. Like, there are impact leaders within our communities, people that want to help. You just got to take the first step of reaching out.
Yeah. So
Please.
I interview Ryan and his partner, Haley.
Yes.
And great. I mean, love those people. Love them. I could not love them more if I tried. So I interview them, right? At the end of the interview, and this is about a part of an hour. At the end of the interview, Haley says, I really wish you had gotten into all the loss that you've had in your life. I wish you had gotten into all the trials and tribulations. I know it's painful, but I wish you had. And I'm literally sitting there watching her have this conversation with Ryan. And I looked at Ryan and I'm like, Ryan, did you leave a bunch of stuff out? And he goes, yeah, Mike, I'm sorry. Like, you know what? And I just looked at him and he goes, yeah, we need to do it over. So we did a second one. We got rid of the first one and we did a second one. And the second one, there were tears. The second one, there was all kinds of amazing opportunity to see turning pain into triumph and overcoming addiction and overcoming a lot of things that, his life has been rough. It's been rough. But because Haley was there and because I didn't know about a lot of the things that had happened with him, I didn't ask him about it. I just got his story. I got the story that he told me, right? But he literally looked at me and he goes, we got to do this over. And so we did. We got back together a couple of weeks later and we did another one. And the one that we did then was really in depth and it was perfect. Absolutely perfect. And from that point forward, he and I have even become, I didn't know we could become closer. We've become even closer. We literally every single day communicate every single day.
Really?
Every single day. Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, everything. We communicate every single day.
It's you meet impactful people that live a purpose more than just themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's inspiring because you're like, hey, I used to think, what difference does one person make?
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm like, one person can make a lot of difference on another person, on one other person. And if you do that, it becomes a cycle and it builds momentum. So Mike, what is in store as we get ready to wrap up? Like, what's in store for the Mike Litton experience? What is it that you're going to bring to San Diego? What is it that you want to contribute with the podcast? What's your mission?
I want to collect stories. Mm-hmm. I want to collect I want to find out where they came from. Okay. So this morning we had John Sapienti on and we had John Sapienti on. I didn't want to say it wrong. And John works with Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney founded Folds of Honor, and he's going to connect me with Lieutenant Colonel Dan. And, I'm a big, big fan of Folds of Honor, have been for years. I'm looking to get people's stories like Bob Norris, right? Bob Norris is one of the nicest guys you've ever met in your life. And to know him, you would not know that he was a legend. You would not know that he was a legend in radio for 42 years in Montana. But you can't go places in Montana if people know that you know Bob Norris, they're fans of his. My wife and I were up there a couple of years ago in Whitefish, not even Shelby. We were in Whitefish and we were sitting next to a pool at the Whitefish Resort. Shout out to the Whitefish Resort. And we're sitting there and we're just kind of hanging out, not doing anything, which if you know me, I don't do that. I'm kind of a high energy guy, right? Right? Yeah. So
you and I are going to get along
kind
pretty
of,
well.
right?
Yeah.
And so I'm not somebody who sits still. I'm not somebody, but we were hanging out. We were just being worthless, right? Just not doing nothing. We're sitting there and this couple pulls up in the Chase lounges next to us. And, I've met no strangers whatsoever ever in my life. And so I strike up a conversation with them. Well, it turns out this guy grew up in Shelby, Montana, and he's one of Bob Norris's biggest fans. Right. So he's telling us all about KESN and all about what happened at KESN and how the studio burned down, and the studio was in the basement of the bowling alley. And I mean, all this stuff, right? They were in the basement of a bank at one point. I mean, their studio was. I mean, it's just incredible, right? And we're literally sitting there having this conversation, and he's telling us about how unbelievably wonderful and incredible Bob Norris is. And I had just met Bob for the first time, maybe 6 months prior, So when we started the podcast, one of the very first things we wanted to do was to get Bob on the podcast and get his life story on tape, because it was incredible. We found out that he had a rheumatoid heart condition that it got it twice. He got rheumatic fever, which affects your heart and your lungs and all that kind of stuff. He got it twice as a kid. And the doctors told him to not exert himself. Don't work hard. He grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. So, not working hard was not an option, right? If you've ever lived on a farm, you work hard. That's what you do. You don't stay in the house and do what the doctors told you to do, right? And he literally looked at me and he said, Mike, if I hadn't grown up on a farm, on that dairy farm, and I hadn't been required to work hard, I wouldn't be anything remotely close to what I am today, health-wise. Because they told him that his heart couldn't take the strain. They told him his heart couldn't take the effort, that he wasn't to go outside the box. He wasn't to go outside the house. He wasn't to exert himself. And he literally said to us, he said, if I hadn't grown up on that dairy farm, I probably wouldn't be alive today. I mean, how cool is that?
It's the stories that people live, just blows you away, inspires you to do more and give more.
Yeah.
Mike, I'm a huge fan. Brian said we're going to bond. Brian, you were absolutely right.
Yeah,
and
Ryan,
I just love what you're contributing to the community, what the stories that you're telling, the people that you're edifying. Like, that's what it's all about, is like, life is so much more than just about ourselves.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that. Mike Litton, the Mike Litton Experience. You just got a taste of him. Wait until we have him back on real estate. He's got big things coming. Mike, thank you so much.
Thank you, buddy.
Appreciate it.
It was fun.